Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Richard. Can you hear us?
Hi, Keith.
Test 1, 2. Can you hear us, Richard?
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hello, can you hear me okay?
Not hear us, Richard, at all? 1, 2, 1, 2. Richard, check.
Yep. Hi, Keith. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? You can hear me in there now?
I can hear you here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I can hear you fine. But when I was talking back to you,
Stream test 1, 2, 1, 2. Stream check 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, Ben, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Richard.
Yeah, coming through fine.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
No, you just press it once and it will come on. And then
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a short break before we can start the meeting because the grand jury room downstairs is being prepared for members of the public. So it won't take many more minutes, and as soon as we know the room is settled, we will be able to start the meeting. So thank you for your patience. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm getting a lot of feedback from downstairs. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm the Chairman, Councillor Pauline Hazel. To begin the meeting, there are a few matters of housekeeping. A risk assessment, including COVID-19 risks, has been undertaken for the meeting. Hand sanitizer, wipes and masks are available. Masks should be worn whilst arriving and moving around the meeting room unless you have a medical exemption. Can I remind everybody that seating is socially distanced with 2 metres between each seat. Please do not move the chairs. Masks can be removed when seated. Action in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate to the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Ronald Street. This meeting is being recorded for live broadcast over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available afterwards. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants, both those joining us online and in the moot hall, please mute the microphones when not speaking. Members of the committee will now introduce themselves, starting from my right then the rest of the committee who are sitting opposite.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Councillor Robert Davidson, Mersey and Pyfleet ward member.
Councillor Jackie McLean, Mark Stanlow ward.
Councillor Roger Mannion, Tiptree ward.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Dave Harris, Beerchurch ward.
Councillor Gerard Oxford, Highwoods ward, substituting for Councillor Beverley Oxford.
Councillor Chris Pearson, Labour Councillor for Beerchurch, substituting for Councillor Martin Warnes.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End ward and substituting for Councillor Lynn Barton.
Councillor Helen Chua, St Anne's and St John's ward.
Thank you. Apologies, I've lost my place in the order. In attendance here or via Zoom are planning officers Annabelle Cooper, Nadine Calder, James Ryan, Chris Harden and Simon Cairns. Democratic Services officers are here for procedural matters. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. We may have a break at 8 o'clock, subject to the items remaining. There are toilets on every floor in the building, and there is an induction loop in this room. This is a quasi-judicial committee which makes decisions based on material planning considerations following the laws of the land and policies of the council. If the committee is minded to refuse an application, members will use such considerations and evidence that will stand up in a court of law. The material planning considerations are listed in the committee's agenda. Has everyone who wishes to speak registered their name? If not, please will they do so now?
There's no indications, Chairman.
Thank you. If anyone has a petition they wish to present to me on any of the items on the agenda this evening, please do so now.
There are no indications, Chairman.
Thank you. You have heard the substitutions. There are no urgent items. Members, are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Davidson.
Yes, I've got a declaration of prejudicial interest on item 7.7.
Thank you. And I understand you will leave the room during that application. Thank you. I can confirm to the committee that we have no minutes to approve at this meeting. I'll now go through the applications one at a time. 7.1 is an application for hybrid outline planning for a healthcare campus and old people's homes. It's been recommended for approval, subject to a legal agreement. Presenting officer is Chris Harden. We have no public against and no public speakers for, and no visiting councillors. Therefore, unless members wish to call out this item, it can be added to the en bloc group. Does any councillor wish to call this out? Councillor Oxford.
Just make a comment. I had a briefing on this item this morning as it's in my ward, but I don't wish to call it out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 7.2 is an application for the conversion of the former Museum Resource Centre to residential use. It's been recommended for approval, subject to completion of a legal agreement. The presenting officer is Chris Harden. We have one member of the public against, Rowena Macaulay, none for, and no visiting councillors. Item 7.3, Mill Road, is an application for the erection of 2 detached single-storey dwellings. Approval subject to receipt of a RAMS payment. Again, the presenting officer is Chris Harden. There are no public speakers against, and Barry Wymark, who would speak for, unless members wish to have this added to the en bloc list. So members, does anyone wish to call out this particular application? Thank you. Item 7.4 is the Riverside Office Centre, an application to determine if prior approval is required for proposed change of use from offices B1 to dwelling house C3. And the recommendation is to grant that prior approval. We have presenting officer Nadine Calder. Public against is Anna Bolton. We have no public for, but we have visiting councillors, Councillor Lee Scordis in person, Councillor Crowe in person, Councillor Goetcher in person, and Councillor Michael Lilly in person. Item 7.5 is All Saints Avenue, Colchester, and its application for variation of a condition following the granting of planning permission. It's recommended for approval. Presenting officer is Annabel Cooper. The public against is Robin Rowe Brown in person. And public for is Daniel Nezad in person. And visiting councillor Roger Buston in person. Councillors, item 7.6. Outside 32 and 33 to 4 High Street, the erection of a statue to the Taylor sisters dedicated to children of the world. Recommended for approval. Presenting officer James Ryan. There are no public for, and Sir Bob Russell will speak only if there is anyone against. Now, we have discussed this before, and although there are no speakers against, it was thought by committee that we would like a brief discussion on this item. Item 7.7, New Pots, Peldon, change of use of agricultural storage building to general storage and distribution, a modular office block. Recommended for approval. Presenting officer is James Ryan. We have no public speakers and no councillors, but again, committee thought that this is something we ought to have a brief discussion on. Thank you. And the last item, 7.8, is Hythe House, Hythe Hill, Colchester, to replace existing timber and render cladding with cedar panels and replacing windows and doors. It's recommended for approval. Presenting officer is James Ryan, and we have only one speaker, and that is for Florence Grubb in person. Now, councillors, do any of you wish to call this out, or do you wish to have this added to the en bloc list? Thank you. Richard, would you be kind enough to read out the en bloc application?
Chair, could I just confirm there was, the committee had a desire to discuss 7.8? No? In that case, Chairman, the items you're proposing to take en bloc in line with the officer recommendation and any amendments or any additional information on the amendment sheet are items 7.1, 7.3 and 7.8.
Yes, that is it. So you're all happy with that. So, Mr. Cairns.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, in terms of item 7.1, given that this is a significant development proposal on land owned by this council, For reasons of probity, members may wish to give some brief consideration to the scheme, particularly as it's unable to support the full range of developer contributions that had been requested. It is accompanied by an environmental statement, so it is obviously development of some significance that members may wish, for reasons of transparency, to be seen to have discussed, albeit briefly possibly. But that's obviously down to the members' chair. But I thought I should just highlight that it may be wise to consider discussing that item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cairns, for that advice. Councillor Oxford.
Yeah, if this was a full application, then I would say yes. But as it's outline, and obviously it will return to us in full, that is the time I feel when it needs to be discussed. But as it's outline, and also the access point and the boulevard have already been approved on a previous application, so I'm still content on that.
Okay, Councillor Davidson.
Yes, and also to add that on the amendment sheet, there's a clear indication of where the public monies should be allocated to. So I think that clarifies the benefit of this scheme. So I'm content too.
I did read that Karen Syret had listed where she thought the money ought to be allocated. Do you have any other comments on that, please, Mr. Cairns?
No, if members are satisfied with the principle, as Councillor Oxford explained, a previous application approved some of the infrastructure detail already. This is largely around the outline elements, as Councillor Oxford highlighted, and in particular the developer contributions, which are set out in the report and amendment sheet. And if members are happy with the allocation as suggested, then they can, of course, consider the application en bloc.
Thank you very much. Shall I just read out the actual application for members of the public present? It might help and give them more information and why we have at the moment decided not to discuss it. It's a hybrid planning application for a healthcare campus for up to 300 older people's homes, a private acute surgical hospital, a medical centre, a 75-bed care home, up to 55,742 square metres of offices, 350 homes with ancillary retail and food and drink.
It's been amended. That's what
Okay. Food and drink, digital network, and so on. There are electric charging points. You've heard about the creation of a pedestrian boulevard. The 55,000 square metre offices has been reduced to 45,100 square metres to overcome highway issues. Members, if you are happy that we do not discuss this, will you please raise your hands? Thank you. So, Richard, that can go on block. Thank you, Mr. Cairns.
So, Chair, can I just confirm that the committee have agreed 7173 and 78?
Yes. We can now go to the applications. So the first one has been dismissed. So anyone here for those three applications that we've put through en bloc, They have been decided, and those people may leave the building if they wish or stay to listen to the rest of the committee. Thank you. Item 7.2 is the conversion of the building of the former Museum Resource Centre to flats. Chris Harden, would you be kind enough to present this to us?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully you can now see that. Okay, so this is an application at the Museum Resource Centre, the conversion of the building from a Class D1 museum to the residential use Class 3. And you'll note that the description has changed from the initial description. So it is for 30 student flats and 6 apartments. I'll just try and enlarge that slide. I can't seem to enlarge that at the moment, Chairman. Okay, I'll just carry on at the moment. So the application is close to the castle, and the castle is to the right. The site is located here. Let's just see if I can enlarge that so you can see that a bit better. It's not going to fit to window. The castle is to the right. This is a closer view of the application site. I'll try and go in a bit more so you can see. So this is the ground floor showing there's a lot of storage of bicycles on the ground floor, about 40 storage of bicycles on the ground floor. So that's the basement as such. The next elevation shows the west elevation. You'll note that there are hardly any changes to the elevations of this property. I've got the applicant to annotate exactly where the changes are. So the aim is to not change anything apart from a chimney and some windows. So this is the next elevation. That's the south elevation. So there'll be some minor chimney works to that elevation. And on this elevation, you will be replacing these windows here as per the previous scheme. These windows are not particularly in keeping with the character of the building, so they will be replaced with something that's going to be more in keeping with the character of the building. And on this elevation, there are not any changes proposed, so that's the east elevation. And similarly on the west elevation, the second west elevation, this is not going to have alterations to it. So just to clarify that the scheme has been amended to reduce it to 30 student units and 6 apartments. I'll just take you briefly through the floor plans. So that's the basement floor plan, ground floor plan. That's the first floor plan, second floor plan, and that's the third floor plan. And the units have been changed so that they accord with all of the space standards from the private sector housing team. So they will accord with those standards. I'll just take you through some pictures of the site now, just so you can remind yourself of what the site looks like. So it's an attractive, locally listed building. And this is the elevation to Maidenborough Street, and it's certainly imperative to make sure that the detail and existing windows is retained as such. So that was what was stipulated on the previously approved scheme, and we need to make sure that is the case this time. So there is a condition in the report to ensure that, and also an informative. I know that is something that people are particularly concerned about. So that is a reminder of what the building is like. So in terms of planning considerations, the site lies within the town centre, and it has been previously agreed that there can be a residential conversion of this, but obviously this is a different form of conversion. The previous one was for 9 units, and this is for smaller units for student accommodation. But it's a very sustainable location, and it's got good access to all the facilities in the town, and is considered to be an appropriate location for student accommodation. It's not considered to be an overdevelopment, and it would reuse a locally listed building and would not affect the character of the conservation area or indeed the setting of the nearby castle. It will be important to condition retention of existing windows as I've outlined. So in terms of other issues, there are no concerns regarding contamination, ecology, archaeology, drainage or flooding for the reasons outlined in the report. The recommendation is authority to approve subject to legal agreement and the payment of the RAMS wildlife mitigation payment. And then the conditions outlined in the report will obviously be applied to the approval notice. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chris. May I ask Ms. Rowena Macaulay? She is visiting us by remote.
Hi, can you hear me?
Not really.
If I speak up a bit, can you hear me now?
That's better. Ms. Macaulay, you have 3 minutes to speak, and a bell will go after 2 minutes as a reminder.
Okay, thank you very much. My representation relates to the west-facing glass facade at the front face of the building. And you may think that this is no longer necessary as agreed, but because there's still been some public confusion that I know of, I thought it worth making the representation all of the same. The confusion comes from the fact that full details of the west elevation have been absent from the development plans on the portal since their first iteration. I saw in the presentation photograph of the front facade, but the actual drawings of the west elevation didn't show that front facade. The whole front half of the building has not been represented, effectively carving the building in half and leaving off, the front third of it. This has caused considerable worry amongst local people concerned to ensure the proper protection of the front west-facing window, and actually made it very hard to make sense of the west elevation at all, even if you know the building well. I understand that a note has since been posted on the planning portal, I imagine by the developer, but I've not been able to find it, written in response to the objections raised, to say that they didn't think it necessary to include the details of the front facade, since this aspect of the application had already been agreed and wasn't changing. I find this rationale bizarre and pretty much guaranteed to cause the confusion that it did. Why not simply include an accurate elevation and add a note to the effect that no new changes are planned to XYZ aspect as previously submitted, and cross-reference to the relevant document? I'm hoping, though, that this does mean the window is safe and that all parties agree on its importance. However, I do think there is still a lack of detail about specific plans for the facade in some key respects, unless I've missed them. Firstly, will its crystal windows be renovated or replaced with like-for-like materials, i.e. steel? Anything less would be to very significantly compromise the building's heritage and industrial credentials. Secondly, plans show that the ground floor and first floor flats to be developed inside both have rooms directly overlooking Maidenborough Street via this window. How will their design be managed in a way that doesn't mean interior walls impact on the appearance of the window from the outside? Finally, what design solutions are proposed that will help address privacy issues, both for the benefit of new inhabitants, but also their neighbours, I'm one of them, and others who want to still be able to enjoy the exterior of the building without being unavoidably drawn into the lives of those living inside. This huge window, more than any other feature of the building, gives its iconic status and is defining of the character of the immediate area. I don't think it's enough to give general reassurances of its importance and the commitment to preserve. If people are able to comment meaningfully, then meaningful detail needs to be given. In respect of this window, such information has been and seems to remain rather vague. I therefore ask that the Planning Committee are sure of these issues and make them public here tonight in advance of any agreement to this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Macaulay. Before I open it up to the committee, Chris, do you have any comments that you can add to Ms Macaulay's presentation?
Really, just to reiterate, Chairman, that as before, the aim is to retain this window because it's considered to be very important in the street scene and to not have it replaced, basically, and that is put in the condition and also in the informative, so the developer is fully aware, and I've also discussed it with them as well, that you know, this window should be retained in that form because it is an important feature in the street scene. So with the condition and informative and the fact that I've discussed it with them, I don't think we can be any stronger really in ensuring that that's going to be retained.
Can we use the word must instead of should? And the other questions that Ms Macaulay had was the window replacement. Are they being replaced by Crittall windows? And also the problem, the concern that inside internal walls could compromise those windows, i.e. you would be able to see an internal wall through those windows. Do you have anything to say on that?
Right, I'll just, with regard to the shall reference, yes, in condition 8, window retention, it says the existing windows on the building shall be retained unless otherwise shown annotated on the approved drawings, and there are only 2 windows that are shown to be annotated, so the rest are covered by that phrase shall be retained. So in that respect, you know, it does confirm they shall be retained. In terms of impact externally, whether we can put a condition on saying we get the precise position of an internal wall in relation to that window, that's potentially doable, where you line it up with the glazing on the window. There's a possibility of doing that and adding in a condition in that respect. Obviously, glazing does reflect light, so when you look at windows, you know, there is really seeing the window and a reflection. Not always easy to see the precise detail inside the building, but nevertheless, there is potential to condition precise positioning of, you know, walling if required. I don't know if Simon wants to make a comment in that respect.
Mr. Cairns?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we could condition a large-scale detail of any junctions of internal partitions with any glazed external elevations. And we could also require that the glazing is painted black should there be any intersection of masonry with glazing. So that would prevent it becoming visible from the exterior of the building. But we can certainly condition detailed drawings of any internal partitions that have a junction with glazed elements of any of the facades. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up to the committee. Councillor Pearson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In regards to Mr. Cairns' contribution thus then, I'd like to support that as a condition. I think Ms. Macaulay made 1 or 2 salient points that we ought to take account of if we are going to approve the suggestion this evening. If we can ensure that the street scene aspect of this building is retained, I think we ought to do. And with regard to the material for any window replacement that might be required either now or in the future, I think, again, if that can be conditioned, it would be helpful as well.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Any other comments? No? Would you like to make that as a proposal, Councillor?
I am happy to, Chair.
I'm happy to second that. So with approval for that change of use with the various conditions for the window replacement and the wall alignment, and of course subject to the legal agreement and the RAMS contribution. Are you happy to go to the vote? No? Councillor Davidson.
I apologise for being a bit late coming in, Chairman, but I was just wondering whether this building has a lot of historic uses in the past, and actually, would it be reasonable, or are we allowed, Mr. Harden, to put a condition on requiring plaques on both streets recording its previous uses? Just because we do have, it is a very busy tourist area, and it is quite an imposing building as well. So I just think it would be nice to inform the public that go past of its previous history.
Yes, we could put that to the developer. I mean, it's obviously conditions have to be reasonable and meet the tests, but nevertheless, it has been done in other sites, I believe. We could ask for that. Simon might want to make a comment on that. I think it might be a good idea.
Mr. Cairns again.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not entirely convinced that it would meet the tests with regard to the imposition of conditions, but if the applicant is willing, we can certainly have a go. I can appreciate members' desire to see the heritage of the town interpreted, and this is obviously a non-designated heritage asset, so we can certainly give it a go. If members are happy to give us that delegated authority, that if the applicant is unwilling, maybe we can relax on that one rather than risk an appeal.
Thank you, Mr. Cairns. But we also, please do that, but we also have the Civic Society, and the Civic Society puts up plaques on our historical buildings. So we do have another avenue to go down if the developers aren't so happy with doing it. So members, do we go to the vote? All those in favour of approving this application? All that, there are no against, are there?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. That has been decided. Thank you.
Chairman, before we move on to item 7.4, could you perhaps give us a couple of minutes while we move some people upstairs from the waiting room?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we're ready.
Thank you for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. We can now begin with item 7.4, which is an application to determine if prior approval is required for proposed change of use from offices B1 to dwelling house C3. We have presenting officer Nadine Calder to start us off, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So you've got in front of you an application for prior notification, which is an application that needs to be determined slightly different to normal planning applications. It is an application for which national legislation has granted permitted development rights. So subject to the building meeting certain criteria, the proposed change of use is permitted under national legislation, and this is not something that can be changed at a local level. There are certain matters of detail that can be discussed, and I'll go through them in a moment. Here you can see the site. So the site includes two large type of buildings that are 3 to 5 stories in height. And this is probably the most important plan. This is the proposed site layout. Again, because it's permitted development, there's not that much you can see because it's just a change of use, so the elevations won't change, but I will show you the floor plan so you can see what the units are going to look like. There's going to be changes to the car parking layout to provide parking spaces and cycle storage, as well as amenity space for future occupiers of that site. And I'll have that plan later again if you want to refer back to it. But what I'm going to show you now, I don't know how helpful you're going to find this, but these are the proposed floor plans for the units. So there is going to be 6 studios, 42 one-bed flats, 26 two-bed flats, and 19 three-bed flats. And they're all different colours. So the light green ones are the studios, the greens are the one-bed flats, the purple ones are the 2 beds, and the blue ones are the 3 beds. So this is the first floor plan of Century House. Then we've got the second floor plan, the first floor plan of Fairfax House, which is the one to the right, and Digby House. Again, same colour codes. The second floor, the third floor, and the 4th and 5th floor. So if you want to come back to these, I will show them again. All room sizes meet the nationally described space standards, which are 37 or 39 square metres for 1 bed, 61 for 2 beds, and 74 square metres for 3 beds. And I don't know whether you want to see this. These are the elevations. They remain unchanged. So this is what the buildings look like. And this is the ground floor plan of Century House, which will remain as it is, and it has commercial premises within. Well, these are the existing plans. I don't know whether you want to see them. Please do let me know if you need to refer back to any plans, and I'll show them again, but I'll leave it on this one at the moment. So there are certain criteria that need to be met in order for the permitted change of use to be permitted development. These are all met. And then the matters of details relate to transport and highways impacts, contamination risks, flooding risks, noise from commercial premises on future occupiers of the site, and all habitable rooms receiving adequate natural light. We can assess them to a certain degree, and all of the matters, so there are no contamination risks, there are no flooding risks, noise from commercial premises are considered to be acceptable, and all habitable rooms receive natural light. The matter that has attracted most objections is the transport and highways impact. And I think the starting point has to be that the site is in lawful office use. It's currently vacant, but it could be brought back into office use in the future without any applications. So it is most likely that you will have peak traffic flows in the mornings and in the evenings. The Highway Authority does not consider that the residential use of this site will be too dissimilar to these flows. They might spread them out a bit more because there will be more comings and goings throughout the day. There is parking provided on the site. The parking does not quite meet the standards of the adopted parking standards, but because of the sustainable location of the site, it is accepted that a reduced standard can be provided. There is electric charging points on the site, and there's a car club, and these two features have been incorporated on the request of the council. There is some parking spaces for the commercial units in there, and the application is subject to a condition that needs to provide a car park management plan so that the car park can be managed appropriately by the management company that will run the site. There should not be any illegal parking outside the site because there are double yellow lines outside, there's permit parking, and the North Essex Parking Partnership have confirmed that they're unlikely to grant any permits for that site. So taking all of that into consideration, it is concluded that the application meets the criteria as set out in the General Committee Development Order, and prior notification can be granted subject to condition.
Thank you very much, Nadine. We now have Speaker Robin Rowe-Brown. Would you please like to address the committee, please?
Sorry, Chair, it's the Speaker for this item is Anna Bolton.
I'm jumping ahead of myself. I do beg your pardon. That's the next application. Anna Bolton, please. You have 3 minutes and the bell will go after 2.
Thank you, Chair. I represent the 28 residents sat downstairs tonight and the residents living directly around the proposed site. We are a diverse community, proud of our area and excited for its future development. We welcome the chance to be here, for we speak from a position of lived experience and a deep understanding of what the area needs and can accommodate. Let it be noted, we aren't against the redevelopment of this site and understand the need and importance for decent, well-planned, affordable housing. However, to allow out-of-town developers into this historic area of Colchester, allowing them to inflict plans that will have a generational impact, it's the council's responsibility to step in and do whatever it can to mitigate the travesty in this planning law. Location. The main entrance to this site is found off Corston Road via a narrow single-track roadway with residential houses either side. The site is certainly not in a largely commercial area as the report suggests. To say the buildings aren't unappealing is both subjective and unhelpful. Perhaps for business use, the blocks aren't unappealing, but in terms of someone's future home, a place to raise a family and contribute to the regeneration of the CO1 area, we would argue they are decidedly unappealing. Curtilage. The site sits directly next to listed buildings on 2 sides. Under Class O of the GPDO criteria, this is enough to halt the application. No explanation has been given as to why this fact has been dismissed by the council so quickly. Traffic and transport. Bottom line, the streets leading to the site and the site itself barely coped when the offices were full. Even in a pandemic, we face a myriad of traffic issues due to the site, which have all been well documented via our online objections, emails, and video and picture evidence. Please listen to your constituents. The council should be demanding the developers tackle these issues before any permissions are granted. Antisocial behaviour. The CO1 area around the site has experienced a worrying increase in antisocial problems in recent months. With no response from the site owners, the police have stepped in. They make no secret when going door to door to residents that by adding 93 social flats into the mix, they will only exacerbate the current problems. Where does the responsibility fall when it comes to the protection and preservation of the amenity of an area? As the Minister for State of Housing, Christopher Pincher MP, wrote to the Residents Association back in June, where local planning authorities consider a permitted development right has an adverse effect on the amenity or well-being of a local area, it can consult the local community on removing the right by making an Article 4 direction. If we can protect this site in any way from this shortcut in planning law and demand something better for everyone involved, isn't that the right and proper course of action? We call for this application to be refused until questions are answered satisfactorily enough to give both the committee and the community some real assurances that this really is the best plan for the future of the site. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bolton. May I ask Councillor Lee Scordis, please, to address the committee? Thank you, Councillor Scordis. And you know you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for taking on this application so residents' voices can be heard on this. I have a lot of concerns about the proposed plans here. So we're firstly told that it's 100% social housing, which is fine, that's great, we need social housing, but we're not told who the social housing provider is. And I've been speaking to people who work in social housing and they've never heard of this construction company. So there are concerns of who the provider is. Are they well known? Do they have properties in the town? Or is it an instance where we may have a London council buying the land to sadly move people out of the area where they live, which is fine coming to Colchester, but I imagine they don't want to be moved as well. And I think the biggest issue I have of this and permitted development is if any of you have read about Terminus House in Harlow that was in the news a few years ago, where essentially office blocks have been turned into flats, and by flats they were bedsits, similar to what proposed here, where people were living in what they termed as slums, and it was poorly managed. And again, we don't know who the housing association is here, so there are concerns about that. And it did worry me in the report where it said that every property will get at least one window of generous light. One window. How many of you here have just one window in your property? How many of you here think that's acceptable? These are properties that I've seen from the figures that I'd be ashamed to send people who are in temporary accommodation. These are where we're sending people to live the rest of their lives. This, frankly, is not good enough. And if we as a council believe in decent homes for local people, we should not be supporting this, and we should certainly be writing to the MPs for the town to completely overturn permitted development. Now, I'm of the mind, actually, if you read the objection of the Civic Society, where they recommended that we demolish the building and rebuild actually decent blocks there, rather than the buildings that aren't built for habitation, where we're going to turn them into housing. So that is an option for me that I think would be viable. It would cause some disruption for local people, but I think we get a better outcome from that for the local community and people looking to live there. However, if we are forced to go down this route, it's already been said that there aren't enough car parking spaces, just slightly not enough. Now, what I worry from that is that people will move there assuming they'll have a car parking space, and we know what will happen is they'll park on Corston Road, they'll take places from other people who've already got cars there, and it causes no end of trouble. What I think would be a better solution is actually being quite radical here and saying we're looking at a development that has fewer cars. This is a town centre development that has excellent links to the main station, bus routes, and a 5-minute walk into town, and it's next door to one of the best parks in the country. I think we look at actually expanding the community area, because there's a lot of properties here, expanding the community area, whether that's a play park, whether that's more of a community garden that could involve people from Corston Road as well to bring the communities together, but also improve the cycling parking there as well, because we can't just take car parking spaces and say, well, you're stuffed. We have to offer the options. And when people say cycle parking, I don't mean just a metal bar out the ground where you attach your bike. I think that we need to insist on proper, secure bike hangers that you may have seen around London, where everyone who lives on that estate, they apply for a key, The bike will not get stolen unless it's by someone with a key. It will remain dry and secure. So for me, they are options that we should look at if we do have to go forward because of the permitted development. So I know it's not always popular, but I think we do have to be radical. Essex County Council has the Safer, Greener, Healthier initiative. We've all seen the horrible things on the news around climate change. This would actually be a good opportunity for us to say, if we are going to build a development, let's look at fewer car parking spaces, encourage people to walk, cycle more when you are in this kind of location. We already talked about the car club. I know there's a residence in my ward that has a car share scheme where it's a cooperative kind of method they've done. So there's lots of options here where I think we could be much more radical and appease a lot of local residents if we're not able to go down the option of declining the housing here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scordis. Councillor Crowe, would you come and address the committee, please?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, it's important to point out that these unattractive buildings fall within the North Station Road conservation area. In this context, this development in this form brings nothing whatsoever to the area. To that effect, I feel strongly that they should be replaced with much smaller scale, low-rise housing, more suited to the setting, with the provision of green space to enhance the area. Under the government's permitted development criteria, the transport and highways impact of the development needs to be addressed, but as far as I can see, it hasn't. There is already congestion in the area leading to the entrance to the site, as well as illegal parking. Add more vehicles to the mix, and these problems will only get worse, as well as increasing the burden to existing residents. Factor in the dangerous driving which we see in that area. I fear it will not be too long before there's a serious accident. Also, with the massively increased additional vehicle movements that are expected, we must ask how this additional pollution fits in with the climate emergency that the Council declared 2 years ago this very month, and the active travel plans to reduce pollution in North Station Road. Also, where are the children who will live here to go to school? North Primary is already at full capacity. Plus, there's already a considerable amount of antisocial behaviour in the area, which includes drinking, drug taking, drug dealing, noise late at night and people lighting fires, and the police have already expressed a concern that adding in high-density housing will increase these problems. And on the subject of the density of the development, we're all well aware of the need for housing in this country, but we should be building quality homes that people will want to live in, that create communities within the wider community in which they are built, not packing in as many as we can into unsuitable existing buildings that should be pulled down, not repurposed into people's homes. So I urge the committee to do all it can to stop this development, including considering making an Article 4 direction as previously requested. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Crowe. Councillor Mark Gocher, please.
Thank you, Chair. Article 4 declarations have been mentioned already. My understanding is that the Minister has written to Colchester's MP saying that in this instance it could be possible to consider an Article 4 declaration which would override permitted development. So would the committee considering inviting the Minister down to look at the development and inform them directly? In terms of my feeling on this, I'm very much against what's being proposed. As others have said, social housing should be high quality, but to my mind, this represents exploitation of the poor, cramming 93 units into those office blocks. I mean, I know of Stuart House, which is not far away, which to my eyes is a much bigger building, which only has 50 units in it, flats. These people are going to be crammed in like sardines, one window each. I mean, that's nowhere to live. But more importantly, I mean, traffic. The area already is plagued with traffic problems. Heavy goods vehicles regularly mounting the pavement, nowhere to park because parking spaces are to a minimum. Anything that's going to increase demand for parking spaces is a problem that will affect residents directly. And it will impact on a wide area, which is one of the criteria for overriding permitted development. Because if you're suggesting that this, you know, promoting a car-dependent development of this scale, not only does that contradict the county council's active travel plan, which is all about reducing traffic, so there's no joined up thinking here, but also it's a recipe for congestion. It's a recipe for increased competition for parking spaces, congestion coming down from the station, especially if these changes being proposed by the county council go through. It will impact on a wide area. Can I ask if the developers made it clear how many children are going to be living in the flats and where they will go to school if North Primary School is currently full? That needs to be considered. What percentage of the 93 units will be for people with disabilities? And is the committee satisfied that the disabled access and the provision for the disabled within the building is adequate? Are you satisfied on that? Has a health and safety audit been carried out in terms of the children that will be brought into that area and their safety in terms of the heavy goods vehicles, the traffic that already exists and the increased traffic? Is the building carbon neutral? What is, how far are any provisions there in the application for it to be carbon neutral or more environmentally friendly? These are all questions that I think that the committee needs to ask itself. The area already is plagued, as people have said, with instances of antisocial behaviour. How is the development going to be managed if it goes ahead? Who will be managing it? Will this fall onto the police, or will it be managed by the owners of the building? And finally, my final question would be, does the Borough Council, or will the Borough Council have any power or any control over where the residents are sourced and who gets allocated the units? Or will this be purely in the hands of the private developer? My view is that these are serious questions that need to be addressed, but also that we need to prepare a case for an Article 4 declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gocher. And now our last speaker is Councillor Michael Lilly, please. Is he here?
Chair, it appears Councillor Lilly isn't here, but he did submit his comments in writing, so I could read them if you wish.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. This is Councillor Lilly's submission. As a local resident, this affects the house I'm staying in as it's nearby. It also affects everyone as this is a permitted development which brings nothing of benefit to Colchester and nothing but more traffic. Pollution to the area, which is already badly polluted. The location is used 24 hours with delivery drivers picking up orders from Domino Pizzas and the one-stop shop. There are cars, mopeds and bikes all flying around. Colchester Borough Council has declared a climate emergency where councillors sit on meetings talking about how to improve air quality and cut pollution. Then on the other hand, you have this plan to build 93 flats with a potential of over 200 cars using North Station Road and Corston Road. Essex County Council have proposed a car ban on North Station Road, but this permitted development makes a mockery of that with cars permitted there. This permitted development should have a car ban and it should be car free to back up fighting pollution. Then there's the issue of which housing association is taking this on. We know nothing of who that is, and rumours suggest it's a London council moving their residents down here away from their families because of high rent issues there. Over 5,000 people are on the waiting list. How is this going to help Colchester residents and families stay together? I ask the committee to reject the support of this permitted development, as all it is going to do is create a ghetto for London councils to move poor people out of rich people's areas. And that's the end of the submission, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Richard. This is a very difficult application for us, I think, and we need some very sound judgment, but we have had very serious sort of directions from our officers. So Nadine, are you able to, there's a huge amount of content that you perhaps hopefully have taken on board. Are you able to comment on
Yes, so there's quite a lot to go through. I'll just go through it in order. First thing, Harlow was mentioned. I don't know the ins and outs of that site, but what I would say is that was a few years ago, and the criteria have moved on since then. So we have minimum standards for flats, and they're all met or exceeded. And there's another condition that states adequate natural light has to be provided into each habitable room. A habitable room is a bedroom or a living room, amongst others. The report states that each habitable room has a minimum of one room. That doesn't mean they have one window. It doesn't mean they have one window. Most have three, because the window arrangement, if you remember, that most of the side of the buildings have loads of windows, and they are subdivided. So there are some rooms which may have one window, but most have two, if not three. Some of them have them on two sides. So it's just a minimum of one into each room, but more. One thing that we have to be quite clear on is we have to determine what's in front of us. We can't talk about this building should be demolished because that's not the proposal in front of you. We have an application which is for a prior notification, which normally has 56 days to be determined. If we don't determine it within those 56 days, the applicant gets deemed consent. So a decision has to be made tonight, because if the applicant doesn't agree an extension of time, they will get deemed consent and they will have approval. Again, that's set out by national guidance. That's not something the council has decided to do. In terms of car parking, it's not who gets there first, and it's anticipated that when people move in to those flats, they know there's a limited amount of parking. They probably have it in their lease that they have so and so many parking spaces, and they will be allocated to units. So it will be allocated parking. You can't just go here, there. There's a condition for a car park management plan where the management company will manage the car park, and they will say whose space is belonging to whom. So the area will be managed. Amenity space is not a consideration for you, unfortunately, tonight under this application. They could provide this scheme with no amenity space. The site plan has shown a small area of green space and a play area. They do not have to do that. They did that because we requested it. And we've put a condition on that it has to be provided. That's a bonus. That's not something they have to provide, unfortunately, under the guidance. There's a condition where they would have to provide details about secure cycle storage so that it is secure. The site is located within a conservation area. Unfortunately, again, that's not anything that we can take into consideration. Whether or not it is in a conservation doesn't matter for this type of application. It was stated again that this development would add more vehicles, but it has to be acknowledged that it's an office use, a lawful office use. There are peak flows if this was to go back to office use. There are already cars, not now, but there could be cars. So the residential use will not increase cars, it will only increase it because the site is currently vacant. It will not increase it because there's a lawful office use there, which could be resumed tomorrow. Article 4. An Article 4 direction could be imposed on this site. The only thing it would do is it would remove permitted development, right? And they would have to submit a full planning application. If they were to submit a full planning application, we could consider more. We could consider the design, amenity space, but it wouldn't change a lot. I've spoke to the Highway Authority and they said if this was a full planning application, they would provide the same comments because they have to again determine the application on the basis of the lawful fallback, which is the office use. So to their mind, the proposed use does not materially change the vehicle movements. The council does not consider it expedient to do an Article 4 direction in this area, considering that we have not identified any material harm and they take up to a year to be done. This application has to be decided within the next 2 weeks. So even if we were to do an Article 4 now, it will not override this permission. And then some other matters were mentioned: disability, health and safety, carbon neutral, all very valid points, but outside of the scope of this application, unfortunately. There will be a management company for the site who will manage, as I said, the car park and the whole running of the site. Whether or not this is for social housing or market housing, again, is not something we can give any consideration to. We are not allowed to ask who the housing association is, who would run it, where they come from. It's simply not a matter that the national government has given us any control over. And again, there's no power for us to decide who could move in there. What I know is that, what the agent told me is that the Housing Association has been in talks with the Affordable Housing Officer at the Borough Council to ask what kind of units are needed in this area. So that would indicate to me that they will give it to local residents, but I can't say that for certain. And again, we have got no control over it. So I think that's covered all the points. From one more, there are listed buildings around the site, but they're not within the curtilage. The curtilage is normally the site that is functionally related to the listed building around the site, and it's normally enclosed. So this application may be, if any development was proposed on this site, it may affect the setting of the listed building, but as no changes are proposed, it's just a change of use, it will not affect the setting of the listed building, and it's not within the curtilage of the listed building, which is why it meets the criteria of the GPDL.
Thank you very much. Can you tell us why we have this application before us now with only a few days left to consider? When could we not have had it a month ago or 2 months ago or something? Can you tell us why?
So we have 56 days to decide it. The application was due today. The last committee would have been too early and would not have taken any of the consultation comments into account. So we would have, the decision was made that if we had taken it on the 9th of July, it would have been premature because not all the consultation responses had come in by then. So it's come now. I've agreed an extension of time until tomorrow so that you can make a decision today and that can be issued tomorrow. However, if they have to, if this was approved, they have to make a contribution towards the RAMs, which all new development has to make, and they haven't got time to do that in 1 day. So they've extended the time until the 12th of August, but they've only done that because if they get planning, if they get that prior notification, if they know that you are likely to refuse it, they might not grant an extension of time, which is why I would advise you to make a decision today, because if you don't make a decision today, there's no committee date in between that time frame, and they will get deemed consent.
Thank you, but if we were to approve it this evening, what can the council do to mitigate any of this? I mean, what powers does the council have? Or is it, well, we approve it or we don't, but either way, we can't do anything at all?
It depends on what you want to do. We can add conditions. If you can think of any conditions that may be reasonable and necessary, then you can add conditions. We are of the opinion we've added all the conditions that are reasonable and necessary. If you find others, then we can add them. But given the lawful fallback use of the site as an office in terms of transport, I don't know how much more there can be done, and all of the other considerations that or objections that have been raised are unfortunately just not within the scope of this application.
Just one more question from me at the moment. If Middleborough is to be, that cars are not going to be able to drive down Middleborough, where will the cars, how will the cars exit and enter that site if they're not allowed in Middleborough?
I'm not sure. Are you sure it's Middleborough?
Would they have to come through the Dutch Quarter and then sort of across, no?
I don't know the answer to that, but also it's not
within this application.
And I know it's a broken record, but I think it is important to just reiterate that change of use, the principle of the change of use needs to be considered acceptable because of what the government, the power the government has given to developers. So yes, it does sound like we're not trying to be difficult. We are trying to, that's why we've put conditions on. We are trying to do as much as we can, given the limitations that we are working within.
Well, councillors, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a lot for us to try and get our heads around here. Firstly, I mean, I don't imagine any of us sat around the room who are decision makers this evening have much in the way of expertise when it comes to permitted development. So I'd just like to get some clarification about exactly what, I mean, I've been looking up the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order whilst we've been going through this, trying to work out what Article 4 is, because I had no idea what Article 4 was. Trying to work out how it applies. So I think it would be helpful if we could perhaps get a bit more guidance, Mr. Cairns, on what the implications are. I was slightly concerned and perplexed when Nadine suggested that although we only have 56 days to make a decision, in which to make a decision from the date of application, it could take anything, and I may be misquoting Nadine, but it could take anything up to a year for an Article 4. Did I mishear that? Right. So that slightly concerned me. So I'll say I'd like to hear more about Article 4 and whether it is possible, I'm not saying probable, but whether it is possible for us to consider whether or not, because looking through the regulation, it seems to suggest that it's not just the Secretary of State, but also a local council that can implement Article 4. But again, I'll stand guided by our experts. So that's the first, I think that's a key for us in terms of decision making this evening. I wasn't quite sure, I think Ms. Bolton referred to a Class O objection, and nobody seems to have addressed that. So I'd be interested to know what a Class O objection is, please, and whether or not that's germane this evening. I always find it disappointing that when we meet as a planning committee that Highways Authority rarely attend, because I think it would have been helpful to have had their direct input on some of the matters that have been raised this evening. I took account of some of the comments that were made and actually noted on my little scribbles that they're probably not planning considerations anyway, even though they may be, you know, of concern to local residents. I don't think they can be of concerns to us in terms of making a decision this evening. But I was particularly interested and intrigued in Councillor Scordis's reference to the Harlow experience, which I'm particularly familiar with, and ensuring that whatever accommodation ends up on this site is decent accommodation. I hear what you say, Nadine, about the listed buildings, and you're our expert, so I take your guidance on that one. I think at the moment that's where I'm at in terms of needing further guidance and wanting further information before being in a position to make a decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Oxford.
I hadn't indicated at this stage. I was just pointing to Chris, who's trying to get your attention.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more speakers on this? Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I share Councillor Pearson's concern and echo some of his comments. The thing that concerned me, Chair, is the residents are very sensible people. They live there day in, day out, and they can see the impact of what 150, 200 cars through there will do to them. Not only that, bearing in mind the changes that have been made to North Station Road, with lack of access through there, it can only be a recipe for a disaster. Bearing in mind, and I think one of the councillors said it, and I certainly Councillor Scordus and Goucher referred to it, about our climate change credentials we passed as a council a while ago. This does not fit well with that, in my view. And then my last litmus test, Chair, for me, and why I'm really concerned about supporting anything on this document at the moment, unless you make it car-free or something like that, then is would I allow my daughters or son to live in such accommodation in that sort of man-made ghetto, as it were. And that may be too strong for you, but for me, that's how I would look at it. And for people to live in quality accommodation, this is not it. So I'd echo Councillor Pearson's calls for that. A few more answers to the questions, and then I'll be in a position to decide whether I'm supporting or opposing. But at the moment, I'm very much opposing it.
Councillor Chua.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is a very difficult application before us, and in some ways, it sounds like a threat. You either take it or leave it kind of, consideration. But what I'm very worried about, which I read through, and nothing's been mentioned about the number of people that are living in those units there, whether there are anybody who are disabled, needs, assistance with facilities for them to get around, to get about. And also considering the health and safety and risk management. I haven't seen any mention about how, if in case of a fire, is there a fire exit? There are a lot of people in 3 buildings, right? And where are they going when there is a fire and they're all coming out with all the people, all the children, and which area are they going to decant to? So I would like some clarification on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chua. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. How long has this premises been empty, the whole premises, please? It's not empty at all. It's still office use and it's still running, because I know the industrial units, I thought some of them have closed or folded.
I'm not sure as to when the last office use ceased. I don't know when they vacated the site.
So it's not empty then?
No, it is empty, but I don't know when they left.
You don't know when they left. Now, do we need more offices in Colchester? I know that's not on the table at the moment. I know we're not discussing that. Do we have a need for the offices or for workplaces? Or do we have the need that we need social housing more? And is this correct social housing for social housing? Because when you look at what's offered, it looks more like student accommodation. And I just think with what we've heard tonight, with what we've heard of no support or we're very concerned about the developer and what they're going to do and where they are coming from. Could we not get a better deal? I know they're holding us to ransom over, we've just got to say yes or no because of the 58-day or 56 day. You know, I'm not happy being put in this position and only seeing this now. And I'm very worried that we're actually going to get something very good for Colchester, or we're going to be compromised and have a very poor design, and everybody's going to pay the price for that. And do we really want to be the town that's going to say, yes, you can come in, you can steamroll over us? You know, is there any way you can see that we can get out of this and give us more time to actually really get to the bottom and actually get some sort of a more information from them that we feel comfortable with seeing?
Thank you, Councillor McLean. Nadine, would you like to answer again? There's quite a few questions coming from Councillor Pearson and Councillor Harris and Councillor McLean and Councillor Chua. Can you answer some of those?
Yes, thank you. So an Article 4 direction is something that the council, local authority can impose on either an area or sometimes even a specific building to remove certain permitted development rights. So sometimes this is done in conservation areas where you want to make sure that, for example, walls cannot be taken down. It's little characteristics that make an important contribution to an area. They can be removed from permitted development rights. Or in this instance, a direction could be imposed on this building to say it can't change its use from office to residential under permitted development. The only thing that does is it means that an applicant has to provide submit a formal planning application. It doesn't stop the change of use from happening. It just means they have to submit a formal planning application rather than a prior notification. It can take up to a year because there's going to be local consultation and it takes some time. There is one that can be done immediately, but the council has to justify why there is such a need to submit one immediately. And we as a council can't justify it in this instance. And the one that takes a year, because it takes so long, an applicant or developer can submit an application or a prior notification in between, and they have to be determined. Even if we were to do one now, they could submit one tomorrow. We have to determine it. We can't delay it until the Article 4 is in place. So we have to determine this application because there's nothing stopping them from doing it. Class O is the class that we're assessing it under. So is the office to residential is in Schedule 2, Part 3, Class O of the General Permitted Development Order. So that's just a relevant class from the national legislation that deals with changes of use from office to residential. Members keep talking about it being a ghetto, it being small. All of the room sizes, all of the flats meet and exceed the national standards, the minimum standards. So a minimum standard is considered to be an acceptable living standard. If it exceeds that, it's acceptable. All of these rooms, units, meet or exceed the nationally described space standards. So I would not suggest that you refuse this application because of the units not meeting the required standards. And I think that also applies to student accommodation. Even if it was student accommodation, it would meet the standards for 1, 2, 3 bed flats. So it would actually be quite a generous student accommodation. We can't say to the applicant, can you make this car free? We have to assess what's in front of us. The only thing we could potentially do is encourage the developer to make it car free. So we could add an informative onto a decision notice saying, if you wanted to reduce all of that car parking and make it amenity land, grassed, play areas, then please discuss this with us. And we will be open to do that because of the sustainable location. But because we have to assess what's in front of us, they are proposing 120 cars, and that's what we're looking at. We could ask them, but if they said no, you still have to assess what's in front of you. Fire exit, again, disability, unfortunately, as awful as it sounds, we can't take it into consideration. Fire exits will be done by a building control. They would have to apply for a building control application, and they would consider that as part of that. I would suggest, as it's very hard, but it's the application we're looking at, it's not the developer we're looking at. There's always going to be new developers coming into a town. It does not matter where they come from. It does not matter who they are. It's the proposal that we're looking at. And so I think you just have to, some of it is hearsay. Some of the things that we've heard is hearsay because we do not know who the housing association is and where the tenants are coming from. We don't know that. So I would just determine it on the basis of what we have in front of us, which is for social housing. Social housing is a relatively wide definition. It doesn't have to be the people that residents fear they are. It could be key workers, it could be people that might be not adding to the fears that residents have. And in terms of more time, I can't guarantee it. The applicant may agree to an extension of time to discuss some of these aspects, they may not. So if you defer the application and ask us to talk to them to get more time, I can't guarantee they will give it to us.
Thank you, Nadine. It would have been really helpful if we had had a planning application with more detail on the actual flats, because we are rather prejudging it. We haven't, we are sort of, as you said, talked about ghettos, but in actual fact, they could end up being really super accommodation. Can you answer what the penalties are if we turn this down this evening? What would those penalties to the council be or to the committee?
So I just wanted to mention one more thing. The applicant could have submitted this application for just a C3 use class residential development. There's no need for them to mention this is for social housing. If they had done that, and we would have assessed it on that basis, and you would have considered it acceptable and granted prior notification, they could have given that over to social housing. So for them to provide that up front, you now know what this is for, but this cannot prejudice a decision. It should not prejudice a decision. There was no need for them to say that, and I just think that shouldn't prejudice a decision. If you were to refuse it, they could appeal if they wanted to, and it's the usual standard. So they could appeal if they wanted to go for costs, because for some reason you may have acted, the council may have acted unreasonable, then we may have to pay for costs. But that's all, I can't guarantee that. So if you were to refuse it and you have sound reasons for refusal, then there may be no implications.
Thank you very much. I mean, we definitely have a need for social housing in the town. We know that. Councillor Oxford.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we would all benefit from some comments, including not only Nadine, what she's been saying, but perhaps from Simon as well, because permitted development is the elephant in the room as we speak. Unfortunately, it's being used more and more, and that really ties local authorities and planning committees' hands behind their backs. I personally don't like PD. But we're stuck with it. It's not our decision, it's a government decision of whatever colour. So, and I'm looking at the previous history here for this particular building. There have been applications for 101 residential units, 99 units. This one is 87, 89. And I think the issue is, I know it was mentioned about whether this could be a carbon neutral build. When you've got a 60s build, almost impossible to do that. I know that because the former rugby clubhouse is a 60s build, and we've been going through that process and found out it's impossible, which is why we're now going for a new build on the site there. I just plain don't like PD, but whether I like it or not doesn't matter. We still have to determine it based on what's before us. So I'd like some further clarification on PD, because I'm sure there are a lot of people in this room who are not totally sure of what PD really means and how restrictive it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oxford. Councillor Pearson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo Councillor Oxford's remarks. I think permitted development has been shown this evening to be the mess that it really is. It ties our hands, it ties the hands of local people, and effectively leaves us at the behest of any developer's whim. Unfortunately, it appears that we don't have much in the way of what we can do this evening, other than to find sound reasons to overturn the proposal from the officer and throw ourselves at the mercy of an appeal, whilst perhaps at the same time looking into the prospect of an Article 4 declaration. That seems to be the one option. On the other hand, bearing in mind what we've been guided in terms of advice, we have to hold our noses and accept the advice that's before us this evening and approve this.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. I agree with both you and Councillor Oxford on PD, and I think maybe we should petition the government in regard to 95 days to determine an application such as this. We need much more time. But Councillor Davidson.
Yes, I'd support what Councillor Pearson has been saying as well, and others. The problem is that the report we've got in front of us actually destroys any reason for refusal. In that, the housing standards are met according to our local private sector housing team. The Highways Authority, as Councillor Pearson mentioned earlier, would, even if it was a full planning application, would be unlikely to provide a different response. So in other words, no change there. And then on 16.35, it says that the Article 4, which would have been a lifeline, actually, that given the main concerns of the local residents, they are actually capable of being fully assessed as part of this prior application, and therefore, that with that assessment, it had not identified any significant or material harm to the amenity of the site. Now, we may disagree with that, but that's what the report says. So the removal of permitted development rights could not be appropriately justified, i.e. Article 4. So it really leaves us with no loophole to move to try and defer or object to this application. And it saddens me because together with the County Council's plans for North Station Road, Albert Street will be an absolute, well, I mean, it's not even wide enough for two cars. And the whole thing will be an absolute disaster, but it's not within our control. And I feel terrible for the residents, and all we can try and do is make sure that the office's conditions and the ongoing development, ongoing discussions with the developer are at least achieving a reasonable standard. The other thing I didn't hear, Nadine, was whether you responded to Councillor Chewer's concerns about the lack of fire escapes. You did. Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that, but certainly we need to make sure that that reaches standards as well. So, yeah, I think the report does for us.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davidson. Comments from me about the car parking. I'm all for encouraging people to leave their cars at home or not buy a car and to cycle and walk. But there are many reasons why people need a car. and not least for the odd visitor who might need to come to them who cannot access other forms of transport either, or for various reasons, and also disabled and so on and so forth. So personally, I wouldn't like to see the car parking availability reduced, but I would go with the majority on that. Councillor Oxford.
Yeah, I've just noticed something that I missed the first time round, and that is something else that would potentially make it more difficult were we to consider refusing, and that is that there has already been a permission on this site that wasn't developed at the time and has since expired, but they'll turn around and say, likely to say, an inspector is likely to turn around and say that it's already been the case that a permission has been granted on this site for residential. And the other thing regarding traffic and vehicle movements, as much as I don't like it, when it was officers, there were vehicle movements, and I suspect county would argue that there'll be less vehicle movements with residential than there would be with office. But I'm just saying we're between a rock and a hard place.
Thank you, Councillor Oxford. Did we have the further clarification of what permitted development rights actually are?
Sorry, can I just come in quickly? Thank you, Councillor Oxford. I did want to mention that in 2017, a prior notification was granted for the change of use. That wasn't implemented. So in terms of your question, what implications there would be if you were to turn this down this May at weight to the appellant's or applicant's reasons. So there may be costs associated with that because nothing's really changed since then. If anything, the accommodation would have probably been made better because we now have the minimum standards for flats and the natural light that needs to be received into any habitable room. Fire escape will be done by building control. So not a planning application, but building control will deal with that. Permitted development is development that can be carried out without planning permission because the government has granted permission to householders or developers to undertake that development without applying for express planning permission. So that's set out in the General Permitted Development Order, also called the GPDO. It's got a lot of different development in there. It goes from building a garage to a dormer window, anything is in there. And part 3 deals with changes of use. So there is a lot of changes of use that can be done under permitted development. The one that we're dealing with, Class O, is the one from office to dwelling house. You've got all sorts in there. You've got storage, everything. So that is development that normally needs planning permission, but the government has agreed that it can be done subject to meeting certain criteria under permitted development. So in this instance, the criteria that has to be met in order for it to be considered permitted development is the building was last used as an office, the site is not or does not form part of a safety hazard area or military explosive storage area, it is not a listed building or within the curtilage of a listed building, and the site is not or does not contain a scheduled monument. Subject to a site meeting that criteria, the principle of a change of use from office to residence is accepted. So the principle of the change of use is accepted on that site. It is then the matter of details that need to be considered, which, as already discussed, is transport and high-risk impacts, contamination risks, flooding risks, noise from commercial premises on the future occupiers of the site, and adequate natural light. So subject to these details then being satisfactory, we can grant what's called a prior notification. But the principle of the change of use is acceptable. So we cannot refuse this on the principle of wanting offices. Do we need offices? That's not something we need to consider because it's outside of the scope of this application. Do we need offices? It doesn't matter because the principle of the change of use is acceptable. So we can only consider these 5 details that we've discussed. And obviously, most of them have not been considered today, discussed today, because they seem acceptable. The only one is transport and highways. And as you pointed out, the office use has vehicles coming and going. But instead of residential use, an office use has peak flows. So the Highway Authority considers a peak flow to be 7:30 till 9 in the morning and about 3:30 to 6 in the afternoon. So an office use will create 2 peak flow movements in the morning and in the afternoon, which will create more congestion than a residential use would, because residents are more likely to come and go at different times. Yes, some of them may be doing the school drop off and pick up or go to work at that point of time, but not as many will come and go at the same time as office use. And that is why the Highway Authority does not consider that it will have too much of an impact on the site. And that, as Councillor Davidson said, will not change whether this is a full planning application or a prior notification, because as the report says, the main issue of local residents is transport and highways, and transport and highways is something that we can consider as part of this application. So that's why we don't consider it expedient to make an Article 4 direction, because everything that we need to consider, we can do under this application. So we as officers did not consider it necessary to make an Article 4 direction. Transport and highways has been assessed, but given the lawful use as an office, it's considered acceptable.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Oxford, did you indicate to speak again, or?
Chairman, I was only going to mention that the matters of disability access and so on was mentioned, and that's covered under development control and not part of this application. It's dealt with separately. I think it's wrong, but that's how the vagaries of planning are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oxford. Councillor Pearson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was also, I think, getting to the point where I'm now concerned with the actual build itself, as Councillor Oxford is. But I was just thinking, is there any way we can add conditions to permitted development, such as, I think, given the size of this development, it should certainly have a sprinkler system in it, if it doesn't already, whether or not we can. Bearing in mind some of the comments that have been made this evening, is there anything we can put, can we condition the type of heating and lighting that is in this building to make it a more sustainable building going forward? I'm seeing nods, but I'm just asking the question.
I would add that as an informative if you wanted to do that, not a condition.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we would all like that to be added. Again, a small comment from me again. If we vote to approve this application, I would hope that our housing officers would actually work very closely with this developer to ensure that the occupants are from our needy families and key workers rather than from outside. And I think we need to be mindful to ask them to accommodate us in a way that we can also help them. I think that's important. Do we have a proposer to approve? Oh, sorry, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was a bit concerned about what I'm hearing across the room, but also comments you made as well, Chair, and you were very valid in making the points about cars. For me, the world sort of changed the last couple of years. A lot more people work from home, and bearing in mind the good links, 16.13 in the document I've been reading actually says it very clearly for me that we can reduce the numbers of car parking facilities there and ask that to be, in fact, Nadine, I think, said it, we can actually ask for that to be reduced and use that as amenity space, which I would certainly support, bearing in mind it's a 5-minute walk to Colchester railway station from there and an 8-minute walk, depending on how breath as you get up the hill towards the town centre. I think that somebody working from home wouldn't need the car so much and could walk to the town centre for recreation, for a pint, and to the railway station if they wanted to go and see their friends in Whittam, etc. So I'd like to see, against what you said, Chair, like to see a reduction in car parks there and more amenity space. I think the residents would welcome that as well, because seeing that many cars, the potential there for going against the flow in narrow streets is not what I would want to see if I lived at the end of that road. So I think we could do something there. I'm not wanting to support it at all. I'll be honest with you. I'll be blunt with you. I'll be very happy, but the flavour of the room seems to be different to that. I've been happy at the start to actually refuse this, but if you're going to approve it, I'd like to throw in the mix, please, a few conditions that would make it better, supporting Councillor Chris Pearson's call for environmentally friendly heating and facilities there to make it sustainable. Otherwise, you're going to be left with a 60s building chucking out warm air, etc., for the next 100 years, and we don't want that. And we also want to make sure that people are living healthy there and walking to the railway station, walking to the town. There's plenty of bike provision. I've looked at the officer's report here. There's stacks of bike facilities there, and Councillor Score decided support his call for a proper lockable, if we can put that as an informative as well, lockable bike facilities to make it a place of the future that we can use for some more sustainable transport systems, a much more greener place than what's proposed here. So chuck out, if you don't mind me saying in those terms, some of that car parking spaces, ask for amenity space, ask them for those lockable boxes that Councillor Lee Scorders has asked for, and make sure that people live, work and play in the same area without the need for cars.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I still maintain my opposition, but I am only one person. There are many reasons why people cannot walk up a hill, cannot get to a station, cannot go here, cannot go there without some form of assisted transport. But anyway, perhaps we could at least have a vote on that before we go to the full vote. Nadine, are you able to answer in regard to the sprinkler systems, the type of heating and lighting, and we know about the cars? Is there, are there things we can do to make this more environmentally friendly?
So with regards to the car, we have a condition that states that the parking layout has to be laid out in accordance with the approved plan. So that would make it 120 car parking spaces. We could potentially reword that to give the applicant the scope, if members agreed, to reduce that. So that would open up an avenue to, when they come to discharge that condition, to potentially reduce the parking, if that's something that you would want. Sprinkler system, again, I believe is a building control matter, and heating, not necessary. It doesn't meet the 6 tests. I would add it as an informative to encourage the developer to do it, but it's not something that would condition.
Thank you. No, I'm sorry, I cannot take any more questions from the floor. I do apologise for that. Members, would you like to vote on would you vote to reduce the number of car parking spaces on site? All those in favour?
Chair, I think you need a formal proposal before you take a vote on whether you
No, sorry, this was just to get members' thoughts on whether they would be happy for that condition to go in to reduce the car parking spaces before we vote for whether we approve it or not. Is that okay? Is that possible?
Chair, ultimately, if we approve it, I'm in favour of an informative to that effect, because I think if it provides for more amenity space on that site, then it has to be a good thing.
That would mean then that I'm unlikely to be able to vote again.
I'd just like to add, I remember a planning application for a block of flats right near to North Station, and at that particular stage we went for a car-free area and it failed dismally. So I'm really concerned about, unfortunately, as much as we'd like to reduce the dependency on cars, at the present moment in time, that's really difficult. And I wouldn't like to see us saying, okay, you're not going to have that, and then people have a car and try and park it in residential streets, which would cause more grief. So I just worry about the ability for that to work.
Yeah, and that's my concern for having it as part of the actual, yes, we agree or we don't agree to pass this. So, Mr. Cairns, are you able to offer any advice on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's obviously a very difficult point. I can see it from both sides. Certainly the point that Councillor Oxford made about displacement of cars into surrounding streets, but I think Nadine addressed that in terms of the existing parking controls that are found throughout the immediate area. If members were so minded, we could modify condition 5 to reduce the level of parking and increase and require a plan showing additional amenity space based on the sustainable location of the premises and the shortage of amenity space within the curtilage of the buildings to serve the new use. It seems to me that that could be a reasonable condition and would be certainly possibly worth a punt rather than rejecting the whole prior notification, which, as Nadine has explained, does meet the 5 criteria set out at 16.4 of the report. So if members were so minded, we could pursue a revised condition 5, seeking a proportion of those spaces to be converted into outdoor amenity space for the use of residents in accordance with a scheme to be submitted and approved by the local planning authority.
How many spaces reduced? How big an amenity space would you propose?
The difficulty here again is that amenity space is not something you can take into consideration. So you can ask for more, but they don't have to provide it. So maybe, just a suggestion, maybe reduce car parking to 1 space per unit. That could be an option.
Councillor Davidson.
While I can see the point of trying to have more amenity space, at the end of the day, this is adjacent to the Castle Park and the cricket ground and everything else. There's ample room for walking and exercise and everything else. And more concern to me is that not only are we looking at the residents' potential car requirements, but actually I expect they've probably got friends. They may even have families and they bring cars with them. And the last thing we want is for them to clog up the neighbouring streets. So I'm afraid I would stick with it as it is.
I agree with that. The amenity space is plentiful, very close outside their door, really. We look as though we're between a rock and a hard place, actually, members. I'm not quite sure where to go from here. Do we have a proposal on the table?
Chairman, I propose that we, with reluctance, agree to approve the application as stated.
Do we have a seconder for that? To approve it as the with the conditions and the informatives as per Nadine's report. Do we have a seconder, Councillor Davidson? Do we have an alternative proposal? No? Okay, then if you're happy, we will go to the vote. All those in favour to grant this approval as per the report before us with the conditions and the informatives added by Nadine. All those in favour? Oh, we've got lots again, yeah. All those against?
That's 1.
And abstentions?
1,
2, 3.
3. It's carried, Chairman.
Ladies and gentlemen of Riverside, we have approved this application, and I sincerely hope that with the efforts of our housing officers and our planning officers and our regulation officers, it will turn out to be a very worthwhile community to be living amongst you. So thank you very much for your time and for your patience.
Are we having a break, Chair?
Yes, we are. I think it's a very good opportunity. We have only we have 4 more applications, but I think it's a good time to have 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 10? Yeah, okay, 10 minutes. I'm back here in 10. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. We are now resuming the planning committee. We are missing one councillor, so we will wait. We'll wait just another couple of minutes. Thank you. We have a full complement now. The next application is 7.5, All Saints Avenue, Colchester. An application for variation of condition 2 following grant of planning permission of application 182603, recommended for approval. Presenting officer is Annabelle Cooper. Thank you. Annabelle, would you like to present the case to us?
Good evening, councillors. The application is to vary condition of planning permission that granted a hip to gable conversion, a rear dormer and a single-storey rear extension. The application has come for committee tonight because it's been called in with Councillor Buston. I'd like to make one correction this evening before I start. The ground floor rear extension on the proposed plans is approximately 1.2 metres taller in height than on the approved plans from the application 182603. The application is located at All Saints Avenue, which is in Prettygate, and here's a quick location plan. For those of you that don't know the dwelling, I'm just going to run through a couple of quick photographs. So this is a photograph from the junction of All Saints Avenue and Prettygate Road. This dwelling here is the dwelling in question, and this is the dormer as built. This is looking from King Harold Road at the dormer as built in the summer. And this was in the winter before it was rendered. You can see a bit less growth of the trees. This is a photograph from the rear garden of the application site. And this is the immediate next door neighbour. For context, this is the approved drawings from the 2018 application. These are drawings shown as built that was sought for approval but was refused. Therefore, the applicants have come in with their revised scheme, which is what we have in front of us today. The dormer is 1.4 metres taller than what was previously approved, but compared to as built, it's been reduced now, but 1.5 metres in width. By reducing this width, they have brought it into the parameters of permitted development rights, therefore is acceptable in principle. In terms of design, dormers such as this are a feature seen in many urban environments and are considered to be acceptable. The prominent elevation is the one that looks towards Prettygate Road, and you can see this is where the width has been reduced, therefore it significantly improves the appearance in terms of design. In terms of impact on properties, it would not appear overbearing on the outlook of the neighbours, and it passes the council's test to that, as it does for light. There have been a number of objections. One of the primary concerns is with regards to overlooking and privacy. It's considered that the proposed development does not have any additional impact or harm compared to what was previously approved. As I previously stated, as built is not acceptable, so the application has a condition imposed, which would mean that the changes that you see before you here would have to be begun within 3 months, so it's in timely fashion. It's subsequently recommended for approval subject to the planning conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a member of the public against, Robin Rowe-Brown. Would you be kind enough to address the committee, please, Mr. Rowe-Brown? You have 3 minutes and a bell will sound after 2. Thank you.
Good evening. Views I'm expressing represent those of several residents in the area. We note that the new proposed plans do go some way towards addressing our concerns with a reduction in the width to the extension. First, I would disagree with the description of the extension as a dormer. The definition to me of a dormer is a roof structure usually containing a window vertically beyond the plane of the pitched roof. Since this extension extends from the roof ridge house ridge to the house wall line. There isn't a pitched roof either above or below it. It is therefore to me a partial third story, even with the new reduction in width. The original approved structure had a pitched roof above it. This matters because of point 11.2 in the agenda, which says that the dormers are accepted features in the urban environment. I would argue that this is not an acceptable feature in this vicinity. Of the points brought up by the residents listed in 9.2 of the agenda, many of which still apply, the most important is the height and increased fenestration of the extension and intrusion of privacy caused by it, as mentioned by Councillor Cooper. 11.2 in the agenda states that the Juliet balcony is permitted development, and 11.8 that the new fenestration will not result in additional harm compared to the approved scheme. We very much disagree with this. The purpose of a balcony is to create a space whereby the occupant can sit and enjoy view, natural light and fresh air. Since the view in this case consists entirely of other properties and their gardens, I fail to see the need for a third story balcony. Light and fresh air could be supplied by the windows in the approved original scheme. The intrusion of privacy into those gardens where children play, residents might be sunbathing or entertaining friends is frankly intolerable. Further, one resident is particularly anxious that the view from the extension and the balcony that overlooks the kitchen, dining room, downstairs cloakroom, and 2 of her children's bedrooms in the house. A serious loss of privacy with particular reference to the balcony. We note that another property in Prettygate has built a new dormer with frosted glass to prevent overlooking. This could be a suitable compromise. 11.6 and 11.7 state that the proposed development is not overbearing and there are no concerns regarding loss of light. I respectfully request that planning officers visit the affected properties to assess this prior to making their decision, because we believe that they are. Finally, the as-built structure and the new scheme are both still beyond the original planning consent to which we didn't object. The principle and spirit of the planning regulations ought to be upheld. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And do we have Daniel Nessad to come and talk to us, please? Thank you, Mr. Nessad, and you too have 3 minutes with a bell after 2. Thank you.
I'd first like to say that despite one of the comments that was completely unfounded and defamatory statement about myself and my intention, every decision that was made in regards to this build was done via our agent and the advice that we were given, who acted as both architect and structural engineer. Planning BC plans went through without hitch, so I had full trust in the agent and the advice that we were given. He advised us to tie the dormer into the side of the ridge, despite the 41 centimetre height change that it would cause. The agent said adding a Juliet was fine as it's permitted development, and that we'll just submit an application at the end to tidy these bits up. All of this took place over late autumn winter, so we had no choice but to continue with the weatherproofing and otherwise face major costs with protecting the house during those winter months. After the initial council site visit, the agent labelled the whole process a paperwork exercise and then proceeded to submit inaccurate drawings, claiming it was accompanying form that mattered. After it was declined, I spoke to the planning officer directly and found out just how poor the advice had been. It was even recommended that we find a new agent. We recently learned this agent had been fraudulently claiming to be an architect, was fined by the courts and has now dissolved his company and closed his office. With the new agent, we've worked closely with the planning officer to find a solution that meets all the council requirements and reduces the size of the dormer. During the process, we have taken on board the objections and feel this new plan should satisfy them. It is smaller in scale than the one that was actually previously approved. It is in line with other recently approved and recently built dormers on All Saints Avenue. It fits within permitted development and will have reduced impact on the public areas compared to the approved plans would have done. The perceived privacy concerns will be alleviated with the removal of the window closest to the side neighbouring gardens. The Juliet does not offer any views greater than the windows that are next to it. However, I would be happy to make the balustrade obscured glass if that would help alleviate some concern, as this would liken the amount of unobstructed glass to the previously approved plan, which had bigger windows than what we've installed. Almost every aspect of every objector's garden surrounding our property is obscured either by trees or outbuildings. This has been an incredibly stressful time. I've struggled with anxiety throughout the whole process, and it has caused severe strain on my family, both physical and mental. We do not have any money left. We have no borrowing facility left. The agent involved misled us about their credentials and the company no longer exists, so we have very little recourse to actually get money back from them. We've scraped together enough money to pay for the proposed plans that we've put through today, but we would not be able to afford to take the whole roof off and rebuild it. I'm at this point pleading with you because we've lost our home once before, and I cannot live through putting my children homeless again because we just cannot afford the changes to put them back to the approved plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Buston.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. Thank you, committee, for allowing me to speak. Could I ask, please, on the screen, can we have put up the photograph of the property taken from the back garden, please? That's the one. No, that one. That's the one. That, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, rather encapsulates why not just one, but so many people from the neighbourhood have actually asked me to call the matter in, and I have. And Mr. Rowe-Brown, who's spoken to you already, speaks on behalf of the dozen or so objections that have put their heads above the parapet to speak. I have every sympathy with the applicant, and I can see that he's been led down the garden path. However, from a planning perspective, sadly, that is not a pertinent item. If you consider the reasons for the call-in, I'll just go straight down to UR2, which requires high quality and inclusive design, and DP1, development must be designed to a high standard, including layout, avoiding unacceptable impacts on amenity, respect and enhance the character of the site, its context surroundings, and existing residential amenity. Well, a dozen representations shown on page 185 at item 9.2 rather suggest that this has not been achieved, and that's frankly why I am required to be here tonight. The officer's report has indicated that the permitted development is considered to be acceptable. Well, it's not considered to be acceptable by the dozen people and more who've actually objected to it and put their heads above the parapet to say so. They are further concerned and initially tasked me to try and find out why the council had refused to enforce where an original planning permission condition had been broken. That fell by the wayside by this application that is currently proceeding. However, it is still something that does not appear to have been asked. The comments, and I note the planning officer's comments, for which thank you. Several objections refer to harm as a result of the as-built dormer, which is not being assessed as part of this application. And the comment against that is, well, why not? Simply because it is the elephant in the room. And the residents have been asking why a three-storey building is now being allowed within their development. And those of you that know Prettygate will know that is a former local authority house in an estate of former local authority houses with rather nice pitched roofs with rather nice ends, as shown in the adjacent house. It is not thought by many that dormer structures, even items such as this, are remotely acceptable. And if they are to be acceptable, and there are one or two, there are not as many as has been suggested, they need to be of an acceptable design, and this is not submitted as being so. Finally, the main point of the issue that has been expressed to me is if you stand in one of those windows looking down and out, you can see across all the gardens of all the surrounding houses. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that the applicant would wish to do so, but it is possible to do so, and that is an invasion of residents' privacy. That's one item. You can see out from it. You can also see from your gardens, residents have asked me to say, it. And as the Prince of Wales was once famously noted to say, it does look a bit of a carbuncle, doesn't it? That's what members are being asked to look at. In the item that says, consequently, the proposed is considered to comply with Development Policy DP1 and Core Strategy Policy UR2, I have to suggest it not by those who are going to be forced to look at it. We've already heard tonight of difficulties with helping residents. We are placed in a similar difficulty again. Committee, thank you for hearing the call in.
Thank you very much, Councillor Buston. Annabelle, can you make any further comments you've heard so far?
Yes, I think the main comment I want to make is that, yes, the as-built dormer is not acceptable, and we've already established that. A standing application was submitted to prove as-built, and this was refused. So I totally agree with what Councillor Ruston said, and I came to the same conclusion. What we're looking at tonight is the revised scheme, which is now permitted development. So you're looking at, if you've got it to be removed, they can build it straight away without needing planning permission. And I realise that it is a common location, but the only place where it is publicly visible and really prominent is the area where the width is significantly reduced. That's why it's considered better acceptable now in design terms. With regards to the discussion about Juliet balconies are also permitted development. A balcony that you can step out into is not permitted development, but because all it does is allows there to be full windows, that is acceptable. And it's also considered, if you compare this to the scheme that was previously approved, it's no additional harm in terms of privacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm now open it to the committee. Does anyone have any comments? Councillor Pearson. I didn't hear that.
Councillor Davison indicated before I did, Chair.
I have too many ways to switch from areas. Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to say, I agree with the opposite. I agree with Councillor Buston. The current situation is not acceptable. It's an absolute eyesore. And then to, reduce the width of this dormer, but actually enhance it with a Juliet balcony, actually, to my mind, actually does do nothing for the neighbours and the privacy and anything else. We've also heard from the applicant that actually he has no funds to enable any of this work. So I have no confidence that actually any of this will happen, and in which order will it happen. So I'm afraid this is a situation of his own making, albeit the builders or the agents or whoever. But it's intolerable that neighbours should have to put up with it. Yes, the new application in part is slightly more attractive, but we shouldn't be here. I mean, he put in a permission for the as it is. That was refused, and what I'd like to know is what's going to happen from the enforcement point of view if we refuse this application tonight. Will they then pursue the reduction of this balcony? This dormer.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have some sympathy with the original applicant, and I also have read and reread the officer's report for us this evening. I think it's unfortunate that we allowed that photograph to remain up for as long as we did, because perspective is everything. And given that that photograph is taken from quite low, I think it probably makes that look worse than it really is. I think it's also unfortunate that Councillor Buston referred to it as an ex-council house, and they're all the same, because my understanding is that All Saints Avenue was built by Hills Builders as private dwellings and always have been private dwellings, and they're all a bit differentiated down there. That said, though, I think that the officer's recommendation that's in front of us this evening is a reasonable one. I did hear, as Councillor Davison obviously did as well, that Mr. Nazard obviously feels that he has some financial difficulties in terms of complying with that, but nevertheless, I think I would be minded to go along with the proposal that's in front of us this evening as a halfway house.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Oxford.
Thank you, Chairman. Always gets my me agitated, annoyed, angry when there is a permission given and people can't use a measure, measure and build to the spec and try to circumvent the system. My view would be is to sue the builders, assuming there were builders, for not building to the spec, because otherwise people are just going to keep getting away with this. We had one, I think it was in Mersey, not long ago, where the extension had been built and it was about 18 inches wider and X amount longer. And it's just, I'm going to say it, taking the pee. Sorry, that's how I feel. And if it was me, I would sue the builders and make them build to the original permission. And obviously, they would have to fund the cost.
Councillor Pearson.
Sorry, just to come back, Councillor Oxford, I believe that the owner of the property suggested that the agent had gone out of business, so therefore there was no actionable case for him to pursue.
So are we talking about the agent was also the builder? One and the same?
That was what I heard. I don't know whether other members of the committee heard differently.
I didn't hear any mention of a builder, just an agent.
Yeah, because the agent is normally a completely different role, isn't it? Okay.
Councillor McLean.
Yes, the applicant did preclude that no money, agent made a mistake, couldn't sue him, all went down that road. But anyway, we've got what we've got, but it is hideous. I'm sorry, I'm personal. I think it stands out, and I think it's a shame for the local residents, but it is a roof space. Why not just paint it a different colour for the time being? And when you saved up a little bit of money, then change it. But I mean, we've only got what we've got on the table. That's the problem. And it's a shame to see this, but I think a different colour would definitely help. That is just, to actually blend in more as a roof space and not so much as, I don't know, it needs something doing to it because that does not fit into the local area at all. It's an eyesore, and I can understand everybody looking at it, but
if we could mitigate it a little bit, I don't know.
What I would like to know is where were building regulations officers, because I understood that building regs looked at these buildings through each part of its development. So how was it allowed to be built like this? Can you say, Annabelle?
I think we're kind of getting a bit off topic. I can say that in planning enforcement, we're involved, which is why the applications have come through to us and why we were noted of the difference compared to the approved plans. I think regardless of whether it was not built with regards to the approved plans, we've established that what is built is not acceptable. And I do understand that we keep talking about that, and I have refused that. So that's a firm position. What we're looking at now is a reduction in the dormer, and actually it's smaller than what was approved. So I just want to show you what was approved so you can compare that to what is now coming before you. Okay, so this is what was approved, and this is what is proposed. So it's significantly smaller in width. It's 1.5 meters smaller in width, and it's only 41 centimeters taller. So the volume is significantly reduced. I also want to bring you, this was an unfortunate photo for us to linger on for such a long time, but I think this is the most pertinent view from the public realm. So you'll see that this will be inset significantly, so it will be a lot less prominent in the public realm. And I think this is the image that you should try and imagine what it would look like without it being so projected far out up there. So that was what was approved. This is what is proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pity we couldn't have a site visit, because I agree that the perspective of that photograph makes it look probably far worse than it is. Councillor Oxford.
1.4 metres taller than it should have been, which I've just done on the...
41 centimetres.
Sorry?
41 centimetres.
Sorry, I misheard then. Fair enough, that answers it. I'll shut up now.
As I still speak in, I don't know, pounds, shillings and pence, what is 41 centimetres, or whatever it is, in feet and inches? Do you know?
I can't convert that in my head. I can Google.
How big is that, Councillor Davidson? Can't hear anybody.
It's 16 inches.
Ha, I can understand that. Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you. That isn't too bad. Again, we're in a really cleft of a problem. Someone has... Councillor, sorry, Mr. Cairns.
Thank you, Chair. I think the main point of this whole situation is set out at paragraph 11.2, which confirms that the dormer, as now proposed, is within the parameters of permitted development. So really, I think the Secretary of State has sort of made that decision for you as to whether this is acceptable, and has already granted permission for a dormer of those dimensions, or whatever we're going to call it. But that would be permitted under the General Permitted Development Order. So that hopefully clarifies matters for you. You can blame it on the Secretary of State.
What a good idea. Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, I'm thinking exactly the same. You know, we're in permitted development grounds again. We've seen what happens on a large scale with that, and now we've seen what happens on a small scale with it. And I think, as I said earlier on, the officer's suggestion to us as the way forward is the appropriate one. So I'm prepared to propose that we go with that recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Davidson wanted to comment. Yes?
Yep. Yes, sorry, I wasn't seconding it. I was just asking a query, really. If Is there any opportunity to defer this, to go back to the applicant and just see if we can get an improvement on what's currently offered? I'm still concerned about this Juliet balcony, people standing there and looking out over everybody's back gardens and everything else. And the second point I would suggest, if we do grant permission for this, we ought to remove permitted development rights on that site. In other words, he has to come back for planning permission for anything else that he considers doing in the future.
Annabelle, can you answer that?
Yes, so it's been extensively negotiated to get to this stage. I know it's not a material consideration, but the applicant has stated that he wouldn't be able to make it back to what was previously approved and that he would be able to afford to make it this. So that's why we've got to this stage, rather than him going back to his fallback position, which would be just to make it as was previously approved. And in terms of removing permitted development rights, that's definitely a condition we could put on.
Thank you. And a comment on the Juliet balcony. I think you said that was permitted and therefore
Juliet balconies are permitted development rights. I understand the perception that they have. I also note that the applicant did say that he would be happy to have the balustrade to be obscure glazed, so it would effectively be a window because you wouldn't be able to see through the bottom. I wonder whether that is something that you would like to consider and discuss with regards to the Juliet balcony.
Yes, I think that's a very good compromise if we could add that as a condition. Do we have a seconder for? Sorry, did you want to say something, Councillor Pearson? No. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Chua is seconding. Do we have any further comments? So we go to the vote. All those in favour of approving the changes to this balcony.
And removing permitted development rights?
Yes, that's part of the condition and the glazing. Yep. All those in favour?
That's 8, Chairman.
And are you against, Councillor Davidson, abstaining? One abstention. Thank you. Thank you.
Chairman, that's carried.
Thank you. So we have approved that application. So thank you very much for waiting. Thank you. The next application is the one for the statue for the Taylor sisters, which we thought would be appropriate to have a discussion on. So James Ryan is the presenting officer. I don't know if he's still here. Oh, he is. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. So, got a couple of items from me now. First one is The erection of a new statue in the High Street, quite an exciting application. A statue for the to commemorate and to celebrate the Taylor sisters. I've got a nice little image to show you in a minute, but I'm sure Sir Bob Russell will give us a little bit of a rundown of the historical context, so I won't steal his thunder, but they're an important author and wrote a number of works, including the nursery rhyme / lullaby Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So apparently lived in Maidenborough Street or West Oxford Street? Maidenborough Street. One of the streets near off of the High Street. I'll show you the photos. Right, so this is where it's going. Just about make out my cursor there. This is the old Mountain Warehouse store, Pelham's Lane. There's a little cycle rack area here, Town Hall opposite over the other side of the road. So that's looking east. The position is basically where that planter is. That planter's now been moved. It's been moved back. That's basically where it's going to be going. So you'll see the footway broadens out there significantly. So it's a really good place to have a sculpture or statue of this nature, because it won't cause a blockage of the pedestrian area in a narrow area. Hence why that's been selected and has been approved by county highways. They'll deal with the kind of micro siting, but that's the planter that's been moved. And that's the position of the proposed statue. You can see just along from Pelham's Lane. This is a small version, a kind of precast version that Sir Bob has commissioned to illustrate what it will look like. The actual statue itself, you can see compared to daffodils, it's very small. But it will be significantly larger, up to 1.8 meters in height on the top of the finger when the fully cast. So there's an indication of how tall it will be. This disc it sits on will be anchored into the ground, so it will sit flush with the existing footway, and that's is effectively its foundation. So it will just stand as if standing on the road, or sorry, on the pedestrian footway. It's of a star-shaped base, and I think the intention is to get the handprints of children cast into the concrete base to kind of celebrate the children of the world, which is part of the reason for the application. So that's it, rather simple, and I'm sure we'll get a little bit more information when our speaker speaks to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Sir Bob Russell, would you care to come and talk to us?
Thank you, Chair. Members, my thanks to the officer for that very concise presentation. If members have any queries or questions, if I'm allowed to answer them. This is something which I've been thinking of for several years. And one of my big regrets is that hitherto Colchester's not really celebrated the Taylor sisters, Jane in particular, who wrote in Colchester and published in 1806 a poem called The Star, which is now known around the world as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, just the first verse of the 5 she wrote. From an attic window in West Stockwell Street, the house still's there, looking into the night sky towards Lexden. Of course, that was in the days before the telephone exchange and the street lamps. And I just feel that it's something that would be a great tourist attraction. As been mentioned, it's dedicated to the children of the world. And if it does become something with merchandise, as the Little Mermaid in Copenhagen has become a place for people to visit and buy merchandise, then the intention is that any proceeds would go to the office of the mayor of the day for him to dispense for the benefit of children in Colchester.
The person who will do the sculpture is a lady called Mandy Pratt, and if you want to see the expertise she has, go to the Layer Road football ground, where there's a statue, life-size, of Peter Wright, Colchester man. In fact, more than just a Colchester man, a Mile End boy, and it's Mile End, not Mile End, who was voted the greatest Colchester United footballer of all time, and the statue that Mrs. Pratt did for the Layer Road Memorial Garden is such that we know that she can deliver. The maquette, the small statue, was made in February last year, or finished in February last year, and it was launched, but then the next month we had COVID. So everything's been on hold for the last 18 months, but the maquette has been sitting in the hall of my home for the last 18 months. So I'm just hoping that members will give the go-ahead, because with a planning consent, I can then, in earnest, start raising the necessary money. My hope is that it will be raised without going to, shall we say, official sources. I hope it can be raised. And if the council feels that the statue outside Phoenix is acceptable, then I think this one is more acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Bob. I think it's a lovely idea, and I like particularly the children's handprints. But I will open it up to the committee. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you. I know it's not usual practice, but I did do a site visit, I have to say, this evening on the way in, just to check, because I must say my concern was about whether or not it would be a block or anything, but I don't think it will, and we've seen photos to suggest that. But I just wondered, Bob, if you could let us know if there's likely to be any inscription on it, because I couldn't see anything in the report, because I think that would be of interest as well. I wouldn't want visitors to the town coming and looking at a statue and thinking, what is that? Who is it?
Bob, can you comment on that?
I think actually that's the question which is asked frequently of the statue in front of Phoenix, and I don't know the answer to that. But it's a fair question. The intention with the star shape is that the Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star will actually be engraved. The detail as to more about the history of the Taylor sisters, we haven't discussed that, but I think the point you make is valid. There needs to be a plaque explaining what it's all about. And I just say I regret that all the years I've been involved in public life, it's come late in the day that we haven't really done enough to promote what is unique. And just as an ad, Madam Chair, there are those who say that Humpty Dumpty and Old King Cole are Colchester nursery rhymes. Well, I've borrowed those myself in the past, but the only true Colchester nursery rhyme is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
Thank you, Sir Bob. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely fully support Sir Bob and Chair, because I think it's a wonderful idea to celebrate our history and heritage, and to do something in such a great way. I think you're going to hardly be hard-pressed to find anybody here voting against it tonight, Bob. We're going to be very pleased to support you in every way that we can. Thank you and well done.
Councillor Chua.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars is something that I have learned in my primary school days in Malaysia. And that also includes Humpty Dumpty and all those that you all learned from here as well. So I'm quite familiar with the two sisters, in the sense that we learned it from primary school days as well. I know Sir Bob has worked very hard to get this to get it through this application here, and it's a great asset. And I can now tell people in Malaysia that can come and see Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars and the two sisters here. So I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's just a very quick one. I just want to pass on my thanks to you, Sir Bob, for your continued work for this borough. I know you have been trying to get this in place for a number of years now, and as someone who is an avid, as you know, diehard Colchester United supporter and represents Shrub End, I wasn't aware that it was Mandy Pratt who would be doing this statue. So for me, it's a given. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be brilliant. So, if I may very quickly say, with the final of the Euros a few weeks back, a couple of Colchester United fans actually put an England jersey on top of the statue at Layer Road. It is visited by, there are more than 3,000 Colchester United fans, despite how many go to the ground, but it's regularly visited, and that's a small pocket of people, if you like. This could be fantastic for the borough, so thank you.
I was privileged to actually be at the opening or the unveiling of the statue at Layer Road. And knew something of Peter Wright many, many years ago. And that did encourage me too for the quality of the statue, because it must be attractive, and it looks as though it will be. So I'm pleased about that. Councillor Davidson.
Yes, I'd like to support and thank Sir Bob for all the effort he has made so far, and wish him well with all the future fundraising to complete the project. My only concern is that although these are young children, you've got a 2 metre wide base for a 1.8 metre statue on top. And I just wonder if it's out of proportion. I just wonder whether it ought to be something like a 1.5 metre base, because it is quite a busy footfall around Pelham's Lane, and I think perhaps 1.5 might be better.
Well, thank you. The actual location of the statue has been moved slightly from my preferred location. My preferred location was actually so as you could see it up and down Pelham's Lane. But the counter argument was that you need to keep that vista open. So I thought, well, I'm not going to argue about that. And where the statue is proposed, I think I'm right in saying will take up less pavement space than where the planter was there, or broadly the same. It won't actually be on a raised platform. The star on which the statue sits has been indicated by the officer. It is pavement level, and it's when you leave tonight, Councillor Davidson, Mr. Mayor, if you look, you'll see it's an exceptionally wide piece of pavement where the footfall doesn't go, unlike the Fenwick statue, where it does interrupt pedestrian flow. And the site has been agreed by Essex Highways, been exceptionally helpful. The lady officer who deals with this, she actually came to Colchester before COVID and before the maquette was made to agree. So although you see the statue there on the screen sitting, it is actually level with the pavement. It's level with the pavement. So there's no danger. And we've deliberately gone, Madam Chair, for the height we believe the Taylor sisters were. They're wearing costume, I should point out, of what middle-class young ladies in the first decade of the 19th century would be wearing. And this has been approved, if that's the right word, by Victoria and Albert Museum, their historic costume department. So we believe we've got it right. And Mandy Pratt has done a lot of research into this. She went over to the Fitzwilliam Museum, I think it was, at Cambridge, and to get the models dressed, as it were. And there was a nursery worker from the University Children's Nursery who suggested the handprints to go around the base. So it's, if you like, it's my idea, but already had people contributed thoughts which we've tried to incorporate.
Thank you. Councillor Davidson.
On that basis, I'd be happy to propose that we accept it as proposed.
Seconded.
Councillor Oxford, thank you.
I was seconding it.
Yes.
I think it's brilliant.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Oxford. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
And something we can look forward to. Thank you. We'll just wait a minute while Councillor Davidson leaves the room. application 7.7 is for the change of use of agricultural storage building and general storage, and the presiding officer is James Ryan. James, can you present this to us, please?
Yes, thanks very much. This is the last one tonight. New Pots on New Pots Lane in Peldon. This is an agricultural, currently a large agricultural unit, which is used to store grain, and the application is for a change of use only for the building to use for general B8 storage for, I think, food packaging, and a modular office block ancillary to the store for the workers to use and to be used as an office. So I'll take you through the drawings. So that is the long access track. So you can kind of see how remote it is in terms of the main Peldon Road up here, the junction off of Peldon Road, and this is a kind of semi-metalized concrete road farm track that leads all the way down to the collection of farm buildings down here, and then becomes a non-surfaced farm track further beyond that. And generally these are arable fields around. Here is the site plan showing some of the other agricultural buildings. The turning area that Highways requested for HGV turning, but noting that there's many tractors pulling large trailers and such currently, so that kind of vehicular activity is used to being used around that area. This is the unit in question with the loading bay. There's an existing shed here which is being retained. The office block is going here, and then there's some parking here and here as requested by Highways. In practice, one would probably park on a relatively ad hoc manner because there's plenty of space down there, but Highways requested some designated parking bays for the office staff. These are examples of the modular buildings, the kind of thing they look like. Basically, there's only going to be one of them. There's two in that photo, but there's only one proposed. It's the access point on the main Peldon Road, looking in both directions. That is looking down towards the buildings. You can see a tractor there pulling a trailer. A little bit of context, generally arable fields, pretty wide open landscape there. That's looking back. This is the collection of buildings in the distance. You see what I mean by the kind of concrete semi-metalized road. So it's not a tarmac road, it's a traditional kind of farm track, but hard surfaced. And the building in question is this one here. It's pictures of the building. There's the shed that I mentioned. You can see there's plenty of space on site for parking and turning. This is the building itself, portal framed, concrete sided, panelled construction. That's the existing shed which is to be retained. And that's further along the track as it heads off in its non-metalized form. So relatively simple applications, currently used to store grain. It will be used for alternative B8 uses, and in this instance for the storage of packaging. We currently have no control over the level of usage in terms of traffic movements, HGV movements, tractor movements up and down that track, whereas we will retain some control as suggested by the conditions at the end of the report here. So there'll be an increase in control in terms of vehicle movements, so there aren't expected to be many, to be perfectly honest, as set out in the report. Very isolated position, realistically highly unlikely to cause any issues to anybody. The only likely perception of harm may be the use of the track for that in terms of the neighbours right up the end of the near towards the Peldon Road. However, they clearly experience existing tractor usage and other vehicles, as one would expect, servicing buildings of this nature and a kind of large scale agricultural use. So planning balance tips strongly in favour of an approval. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I'll open it to the committee. Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, I was going to suggest refusal as it's still just a bit too close to the main highway. No, I think, Chair, I can't see any reason why we shouldn't support the officer's recommendation, and I propose.
Seconder, Councillor Oxford again. Thank you very much. Shall we go to the vote? All those in favour to approve?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That is approved. And thank you, everybody. It's been a long and difficult evening. And I thank you for the very serious considerations you've made on these applications. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the officers too. They've had quite a hard time of it too. Thank you very much.